San Diego Union-Tribune is San Diego's largest and most experienced news organization, winner of 4 Pulitzer Prizes and 37 regional Emmys. We deliver the news with depth, authority, and over 150 years of local knowledge. Our journalists speak truth to power. The Union-Tribune serves everyone who cares about our community. Support our work. Subscribe today on our website, SanDiegoUnionTribune.com.
Los habitantes de San Diego logran grandes cosas todos los días. Nos preocupamos por nuestros vecinos y por nuestra comunidad. Nos adaptamos al cambio. Hacemos que nuestros líderes rindan cuentas. Vivimos en una de las ciudades más dinámicas de América, el San Diego Union-Tribune y el Union-Tribune en español. Hemos contado la historia de San Diego por más de 150 años.
We use our phones to order food, share our stories, and so much more. SDCCU made banking from your mobile device easy too. You can do so much. Get up-to-date account balances, deposit checks, and more, safely and securely, all through the convenience of your smartphone. Get all of this and more with free checking with e-statements. SDCCU, it's not big bank banking, it's better.
Hello, I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Brian Clark, a Vasiliadis Director of USD's Humanities Center.
USD, along with the College of Arts and Sciences and the Humanities Center, is proud to be the presenting sponsor for the 2022 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books on the USD campus.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community, alongside renowned authors from all over the world, and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from different perspectives.
On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the festival.
Welcome, readers, to the virtual portion of the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books 2022. My name is Mary Elizabeth Iturralde, and I am a Southern California bookseller, and I am delighted to be in conversation today with Karin Slaughter. Karin is the author of more than 20 instant New York Times bestselling novels, with several in development for television. She's published in 120 countries with more than 40 million copies sold across the globe. A native of Georgia, she lives in Atlanta. Girl Forgotten is releasing on August 23rd, which is very close to when this is airing. So welcome, Karin.
Thank you.
So just for context for people, even though the festival's in August and your book release is in August, we are talking in July. So any sort of time synchronicity issues are probably related to that. So when I was getting ready for this, one of the things that surprised me was the fact that you have more than 20 books out, because certainly you're not a debut author, but in my mind, somehow you were still a new author. But it's been like a decade since you got your first Edgar Award, which was for The Unremarkable Heart, the short story in MWA Presents Vengeance. So I guess we consider you an established author now?
I hope so. I feel kind of established. I don't want to be establishment per se, but yeah, I'll own that.
Yeah, it's funny, time was wonky even before pandemic time, right?
Truth.
So talking about Girl Forgotten, one of the things I want to talk about is what's in a name. And for starters, let's talk about the fact that Girl Forgotten, oh yeah, it shows up. I was worried it would be too shiny. And Pieces of Her, both are listed as standalones right now, depending on what database you're looking at, but they're actually tied together. So when do two or more related books become no longer standalones?
Well, for me, I've written a few standalones, and I love doing it because the stakes can be higher, right? I mean, just to be honest, you could kill everybody at the end because you're not going to write about them again, or you can have really horrific things happen to them and not worry about the sequel where you have to pick up. But with Pieces of Her, when I finished it, I did think that was it, that it was going to be a standalone, and I wrote several additional novels. And then I started getting the scripts from Charlotte Stout, who's the head writer, showrunner on Pieces of Her, and questions about character and motivation and that sort of thing. They really involved me in it. And I thought, wow, I'm really thinking about these characters and wondering what happens after the book. I mean, the book is the book and the show is the show. So, of course, there are differences in them. So, it made me think about the book characters in a different way. And one of the things I think I'm known for is writing about really strong women. Well, Andy is basically the first woman I wrote about who isn't strong when you meet her. You see the process of her maturing, and, she sort of grows into her own by the end. But we see the manifestation of that growth pick up in Girl Forgotten. And I love the idea of that. Like, let me think of a way, part of Laura's story in Pieces of Her was she blew up her life, right? Because she just didn't want to live that kind of life. And so I gave Andy that same thing. She does something completely crazy. She becomes a U.S. Marshal. And the more I learned about what it takes to become a U.S. Marshal, I thought, oh my God, no wonder these people are such, dick slingers. I mean, that is full on training, hand-to-hand combat, just like kicking each other's butts. They have an ambulance right by when people are fighting, because they say, the bad guys out in the field aren't going to be pulling their punches, so you shouldn't pull your punches. I mean, so what they do is insane. And I thought there was no better way to have her go through this trial by fire and come out the other end than to do something like that.
And it, like you said, it's been a journey for her. And I noticed you're still calling her Andy, but one thing that I noticed happened between Pieces of Her, which the book was released in 2018, and Girl Forgotten, is she's now Andrea, which I think is maybe something she's grown into.
Yeah, in Pieces of Her, literally the opening has her correcting her mother. Don't call me Andrea, call me Andy. And there's a real reason why Laura doesn't want to use that name. And so she's kind of recreating herself, and she thinks she has to have a new name. But if you'll notice, the people who are from her old life still call her Andy. And I think that she realizes at the end, I really am Andy. That's who I am. It's something her mother says to her: wherever you go, there you are. You can change your name, but you're still going to be the same person.
Yep. But you can have that little buckaroo bonsai moment. Awesome. So also related to names or words, Girl Forgotten is very apt, but also, are we at a stage where there's still concerns about too many titles with the word girl in them in the crime section?
Maybe, I don't know. My publisher certainly didn't think so. And they are really focused on titling. I've had daughter, woman, wife, all those things. So I think probably Gillian Flynn's next book is going to have to be Girl, just to finish it out for us. But I think it just ties in so well because there is a girl in the book named Emily Vaughn, and she was murdered 40 years ago. That's not much of a spoiler alert. She's in the first chapter of a Karin Slaughter novel, so her life's not great. And she is kind of forgotten, even by the people who loved her. There's this sense of they didn't really know who she was. And that idea is not a new one. We have women who are murdered every single day in America. Homicide is the number one, well, for now, before all the world changed over, homicide was the number one reason women were dead when they were pregnant. It's the number one reason for mortality. So that's something that we don't really talk about or really try to solve as a society. And Emily is one of those forgotten girls.
And, Emily was very relatable to me. I mean, I try to enjoy books about all kinds of people, but she and I are of an age. We came of age and we were in high school in the 80s, all of that. And so for those sections, working on that place in time 40 years ago, there's a portion where you have music references. What other sort of things did you do to sort of really help tie that time, those sections to that time?
Well, there's a lot. It doesn't feel like it, but it's set in kind of the DC, Maryland, Virginia world, right? So there's a lot of politics that aren't the focus of the book, but they get mentioned as asides. And so I had to really do my research and, call on my local librarians to help me, with newspapers and things like that, very specific to that area, right? Because sometimes a news story that's national isn't local and something that's local isn't national. So I needed to understand what was going on in that particular slice of America, and just nationally looking at, things that were going on, because, a lot of people associate many different things with the 80s, but if you look at specific weeks, and think about, my character can only have knowledge up until this date. So if something happens after it and someone's really good at history, they're going to say, that's wrong. So those things have to be really exact, because I think as a writer and as a reader, it's those little details being wrong that make you not trust the author. And a book like this, you really have to have some faith in me that I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm talking about. And so that was really difficult. But, the music stuff, I'm of the opinion that the 80s was sort of the best of times and the worst of times for music. And so I tried to pick some really interesting pieces to kind of make Emily look interesting. And then, we catch up much later with someone who's a friend of Emily's, who's very into music still. And then she has to choose something. This woman, who's an older woman, has to choose a type of music she thinks that Andy would like and reference, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on in the book that takes a ton of research, but it's just one line.
Right. Early on, there's I think a really good example of that where you can be someone like me who's very West Coast centric and go, oh, Emily got cookies out for her grandmother. And I don't have to know what the cookies are, but I did go and look them up because I'm like, I don't know these. And now I'm like, damn it, they sound delicious. I want these to be available out here.
They're amazing. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think interstate traffic is going to be allowed anymore. So you might want to order some now. But that's really important. And, the beer that her father drinks and the type of clothes he wears, that sort of thing. I've got a lot, just because I tend to write stuff rooted in history. I've got a lot of Sears catalogs. I've got a lot of, just to kind of get the look. I mean, Sears was basically knockoffs, but it gives you an idea of where lapels were and what collars look like, that sort of thing.
Right. I mean, there's more to setting something in the 80s than just giving somebody a members only jacket.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you got to know when they were popular.
Yep. The other thing that is sort of part of the history, but also part of the contemporary timeline, you mentioned the politics. So that was the area of Ronald Reagan's presidency. There were decisions made about Emily's bodily autonomy that are very relevant to some of the conversations we're having today. So do you want to talk a little about how you manage to, give your characters these things to deal with without having to...
Girl, I was in a fantasy land. This was written a year ago, okay? I was like rainbows and butterflies compared to where we're at now. So, and then I got the final past pages, which is my last time to look at the book. And I was reading it with the context of things that are happening, right? So this was a few months ago, and thinking, holy crap, I've written just by mistake a really political part into this that wasn't even intended to be there in the first place. So, I mean, that was not by design. But, you know, that quite often happens with crime writers. We tend to write a book a year. We're always looking for stories. We're paying attention to the details, right? We talk to a lot of police officers. You know, one book I wrote, I think 4 years ago, right after Pieces of Her. Yeah, the book after Pieces of Her was about a cult-like group who stormed the state capitol to you know, take prisoners. And, you know, people were, when January 6th happened, going, wow, how did you know that? I'm like, I talked to cops. They knew this. They were warning about this. You know, it's just like,
Sure.
You can go back in history and predict this kind of thing, whether you're looking at Timothy McVeigh or even the Civil War, you know, what happened after that. So you often have these kinds of violent upheavals. You know, the 60s, for instance, were extremely violent. You had all these assassinations and protests. And, you know, anybody who thinks what's going on right now should look back, because it, you know, everything old is new again, basically. A lot of the same people are still there. I mean, they're just never going to freaking die. So, you know, that kind of thing just kind of can make it into a novel, whether the thriller writer is deliberately doing that or not. And then, you know, a year later, the actual thing happens. And people think that you're some sort of magician when really you just talked to a bunch of cops who were paying attention.
So speaking of talking to law enforcement, certainly crime and law enforcement and guns are all part of our current discussions. So what are your thoughts on, you know, like making Andy/Andrea a marshal? Because in some ways, you know, when they're working like their judicial security gig, they are almost literally being the good guy with a gun, if we can use guy in a gender inclusive sense in this moment. So did you have any hesitations about how you were dealing with your law enforcement characters? Or
No, I didn't have hesitation. I mean, certainly with judicial security, things have gotten really hot, right? And when I wrote the book, they weren't at that extreme. I mean, we've just gotten more extreme. It's not my fault. What fascinates me about the marshals is they usually know exactly who they're dealing with. They don't tend to investigate. You know, there's a fugitive, they go find them. You know, a lot of times on television, writers will use the FBI as a stand-in for marshals. And it really pisses the marshals off, because they're like, you know, why is the FBI doing that? That's what the marshals do. Particularly after 9/11, when the FBI turned outward toward foreign terrorism as opposed to domestic terrorism, the U.S. Marshal Service picked up a lot of things, like going after pedophiles and, you know, seizing assets from people who aren't paying their taxes and stuff like that. So in law enforcement, you can definitely find a lot of things wrong with policing. And as citizens, it is our duty to question that, because if we do not trust the police, they cannot protect us. If we do not, they serve at our pleasure, and they need to earn that trust. And, you know, the police officers I talk to them for a reason, because they give me that side of policing where they're really trying to be transformative and trying to be the good guys, right? And so I'm very careful when I do write police officers to make sure, or law enforcement of any kind, to make sure that I include that there's some really shitty ones too, right? I write about good ones, I write about bad ones, I write about people in the middle who kind of just look the other way, you know, but I might as well be writing about anybody who works at any institution. I mean, I'm sure there are people at, you know, name any, I mean, San Diego, of course, you got the military there, so let's not pick on them, but name any big company even, you're going to have all different sorts of people. The difference is we give them the ability to take away our freedom. And that's why we hold them to a higher standard. And I think as citizens, we have to remember that they need to remember that as well, that they serve at our pleasure and they need our trust.
And additionally, as you mentioned, one of the roles for the marshals is not usually being investigative, right? Like some things they are, but mostly, like many law professionals who are not homicide detectives, they're not really supposed to be looking into murders, but it's, something we all accept. It's crime readers are willing to give that suspension of disbelief. Sorry, that was a long pause while I groped for suspension of disbelief. So did it change what resources and tools Andy had available to make her a marshal versus another type of detective?
So the Marshal School is in Glenn County. They call it Glencoe, and it's in the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, which is called a FLETC. They love acronyms. But all government law enforcement, like DOJ, ATF, all of those guys go through this FLETC. And they learn investigation, right? There are different levels of things. And so the town it's in, Brunswick, is probably the most policed town in the entire nation because they're out in actual streets following people, and it's all scenarios, pretend scenarios. And
sure.
They're given houses they need to raid and real world stuff that they would have to do when they're in the field. And so the marshals go through that. And they finish that part, and the FBI's agents go off, DEA goes off, all that, and the marshals stay there for more training. And what they do is really the physical stuff. This one woman I spoke to, she said she put on 5 pounds of muscle in that extra part of marshal school because they're running every day. It's in Brunswick, which is like a swamp, basically. They fight in a sand pit. And there are fleas in there, and they will douse you with a fire hose, and you're supposed to fight, and you're pulling ropes, and you're doing all this. I know it sounded horrible, and why would anyone do that to themselves, But thank God they do, because
right.
You can always tell the marshals if you see video of cops standing around, law enforcement. You don't really need to, because they're the ones who don't have the guts. They're the ones who they stay in shape because they want to chase after people. And their training is ongoing. So that's a really important thing also. A lot of problems, people talk about defunding the police. Rural policing is so underfunded. They might get a tank, but their officers are paid such a low salary. Their training isn't paid, like extended training isn't paid for. And, so you have a lot of problems. It's why crime is up 25% in rural areas. I mean, the most violent city right now per capita is Jackson, Mississippi. They have more gun violence per person than Chicago. So it's a real issue and how we spend that money should be done more wisely than what we're doing now. But the thing about the marshals is they're constantly trained. They're always there to coordinate with people. I mean, the whole ethos of the marshal, they can deputize people. They constantly do that. And they have to get along. They're not like the FBI. We don't need you anymore. We'll take over. They're in there. They're cooperating. And they can investigate. They have that training. Judicial services, they investigate death threats against judges, which there are so many more now than there used to. I mean, there's just more death threats. What is wrong with people? It's like it goes from like, I don't like you, to if you're a woman, you should be raped, right? But then death threat. It used to be 10 more steps before you get to death threat. As Andy says, they're like Starbucks, everybody has access to them. So to me, that was just something I wanted to write about, was like the Swiss Army knife of the being a U.S. Marshal and how they can do all these things.
Yeah, and it's kind of neat. I didn't realize quite how comprehensive the number of duties that they do was, and they're actually the original federal law enforcement body.
Washington started it. Yeah. It's crazy. But, I was just in Europe touring with this book, and I said, look, don't worry. Americans don't know what the marshals do either. We know Con Air and The Fugitive. The Fugitive is probably a better representation than Con Air, right? But Justified on television. That's actually kind of close to what marshals do. They just show up, they kind of stir up shit, and they take down the bad guys, and then they go to the next one.
So do you get questions, because your books are releasing in the UK and I believe Australia as well prior to the United States, and those are very different environments in many ways, but specifically with regard to guns. So do you go there and your audiences are just like, does every American have 40 guns in their house?
Well, so I was just in the Netherlands and Belgium, Flanders, with the Dutch edition, and the UK. Ireland has it. And everywhere I go, I have to kind of explain why we are the way we are. Like, we just tolerate these mass shootings. It's crazy. I'm a gun owner. And I many years ago was actually a member of the NRA. And then I just thought, this is crazy. This is not. I joined it because they gave you lessons on how to safely use firearms. I mean, that was very useful. And it's kind of what it was started for. It was started by Union soldiers who said, hey, you know what? We are awful shots. We do not know how to take care of our guns. Let's form this organization so that we understand how rifles work and we're better shots, because they were just terrible. And that's like the genesis of this organization that is now just gone off the rails. But I'm a gun owner. I think you should have to do more than just go into a store to get a gun. I think there should be much more regulation. I think if my uterus is going to be this regulated, a freaking AR-15 should. So, I think I can speak to both sides of that. If we could have no more gun violence, I would totally give my gun up. Absolutely. I know a lot of police officers and who would really, really like for us to regulate guns more carefully, because they're the ones who are on the other end, and they're the ones who go to these scenes of mass shootings. And if they're properly trained and they're going to do what they're supposed to do, might end up shooting that quote good guy with a gun because they don't know who you are.
Right.
So that it's very complicated. It can be solved. I don't think anyone wants to solve it in America. And I think it's just because we're getting to this point where we're just living with horrible things happening. So we'll see what happens next.
We'll hope. I was a Arizona resident when Gabby Giffords was shot in Tucson, and lived through that, and Gabby and a number of other people that I know feel very similar to you, right? Her organization is just, I think, called Giffords now for name recognition, but it was Americans for Responsible Solutions, because the idea was not, the government is coming for every single gun of everybody. It was, let's have reasonable and responsible gun ownership.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't argue with arsonists. You just can't.
Especially if you've got a bunch of paint in the building.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Went a little deep in that one. So what do you want your readers to take away from Girl Forgotten? What's the thing that you'd like them to do besides that sort of nice, satisfaction of a crime that is solved?
Well, that's kind of the whole ball game. That's why I think people enjoy thrillers, especially now. The world is so crap, but you read a thriller and people are punished for the bad stuff they do, right? Where does that happen? People actually are punished. So there's a process and people are arrested and, that kind of stuff. So I think that's a really big part of it that I like as a reader is, at the end, there's going to be a solution. I think with COVID, if somebody would just say, look, if they had gone back, excuse me, if they had gone back to like when this all started in February, March of 2020 and said, look, it's horrible, but it's going to be over August 24th, 2023, would have been like, okay, we'll do it. People don't like uncertainty. And so for me, that's what I want people to have in my novels. I want them to have that certainty that they're in good hands, that they're going to enjoy the read, that things will make sense, and that, the good people will live to fight another day.
I think you're right. I think that's appreciated, and I think that that's needed. So thank you so much, Karin, for taking time to spend with the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books readers today. Thanks for talking with me and being willing to, dive into the tangential issues that influence books. I'd like to remind everybody that Karin's books are available via the booksellers at the San Diego Union-Tribune's bookshop.org link. And please consider supporting the Union-Tribune's nonprofit partner, the San Diego Council on Literacy, as well. And once again, I'm Mary Elizabeth Iturralde, and I've been speaking with Karin Slaughter, and it's been a delight. Thank you so much, Karin. I look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jose Cruz, CEO for the San Diego Council on Literacy, a proud partner with the San Diego Union-Tribune in the 2022 presentation of the Festival of Books taking place this Saturday at USD. Today, we're at the festival site, and in just a few days, this campus will be buzzing with people who love books, love reading, and love writing. The Festival of Books is our community's largest single gathering place for writers, publishers, and book lovers of all ages. The San Diego Council on Literacy is the beneficiary of proceeds from this event. When you participate in the festival, you support greater literacy in our region. This means a lot of things, including more books for children who need them the most. And of course, by being here, you'll have a good time. So please join us Saturday, August 20th, as we converge with thousands of other festival attendees to celebrate the joy of reading here on the USD campus.